Hello and everyone, welcome to the first session of our webinar. It's been an exciting time. You just heard Gohar, who is our manager at CLT. I head the Center of Learning and Teaching, and you will see some of my other team by and by as we move on. Very quickly, we had a huge response because HEC was very, very happy with the course and they sent it out to all 300 campuses. And then we have many international partners and we sent it through them to many international colleagues. Just to give some numbers, we had for this session, we had 12,403 registrations, of which 10,000 plus are from Pakistan and nearly 2,000 are from international campuses, which includes 112 countries of the world, and all the continents are represented, started from Africa, all around Asia, Central Asia, South Asia, Southeast Asia, Far East, Middle East, Europe, North America, South America, New Zealand, and Australia. Time frame probably for many is an issue. And so all the materials that are developed during this course are sent to all the registrants. That's the understanding. And that's why people usually register. But right now we have we are nearing 1,000 participants from many parts of this country. And I'm delighted to see as far as the North, Gilgit, and the south to, Balochistan, and so Northwest Frontier. And so it's an amazing response, and we hope to keep on improving our series that we have been offering since the past many, many years. And we have improved because of your feedback. And we look forward to that also in your comments. I'm now going on to what I've been telling him, you're the opening batsman. And I'm very, very delighted to somebody, a respected colleague. I've known him a long time, and he's a big name in education, Faisal Bari. He's recently been appointed as the Vice Chancellor of National Institute of Technology, but he also holds his position, I think, at LUMS. You're still teaching at LUMS, Faisal? Yeah. And he comes with a very stellar academic and experience record. I have come to know Faisal and his thinking mind through the Dawn articles that he regularly posts. And I think he talks about all issues related to social issues regarding education. He has served in many places. He has been a dean of School of Education at LUMS. And also with HEC, he is member of at HEC, Punjab Examination Commission. He has been a Rhodes Scholar, and he holds a PhD in economics. That's interesting. Faisal, if you write about education, that's interesting. And I always thought economists and educationists don't see eye to eye. So that's the beauty perhaps you bring to the field. And you hold also a bachelor's from University of Oxford. Remarkable. So over to you without much ado. And you will explain why you have said theories of research in social sciences, because that was my first question to you. Okay. Over to you.
Ji, thank you very much, Dr. Zia. It's a pleasure to be here. Assalamu alaikum and a very good morning to everyone. It's amazing to see so many people joining. Thank you very much for that. And I hope we have a lovely time during this hour discussing the foundations of theories of research, foundations of research. And I've termed it social sciences in my presentation, which I hope you can see now. And the reason is, I think there are some really interesting questions that are raised by bringing in the social sciences, the historical development of the foundations for research and its epistemology. One of the key developments was how do you think about social sciences as we move forward into research. And so let me just begin by saying I only have 35-40 minutes, and this is an overview or an introduction to a very vast area for almost 300-400 years, last 300-400 years where these changes have happened. And so we'll go a bit quickly for those who would like, obviously, more details. I'm putting in names for some of the key players here. You can read more about them. And I think philosophy is one of the areas that I do teach even now in education. And it's a fascinating journey that we're going to talk about today. So what I'll do is we'll frame the research conversation. Where did it start from and how did it start? And come to the questions at the foundation. And those foundational questions have to do with epistemology, ontology, and ethics. And that interplay is what will shape, in some ways, the beginning of the research foundations conversation. It will tell us how the initial steps were taken in the theories of research and where we are now in terms of how we think about research, especially for the social sciences, but even in the sciences as such. So let me begin by what I said, the issue of framing. The starting point essentially is when in the concurrently with or a little before the Industrial Revolution, we have the rise of critical thinking about the universe. Science, then termed as natural philosophy, was seeing quite a heyday in terms of people starting to think of Galileo and others starting to think much more about science and how science should be done. And in parallel, we had the second big pillar that was moral or political philosophy, which in some ways we can call ethics as well. And the two were developing. You would remember or might have read of or know of a number of polyglots who at that time were good in both science as well as in philosophy, what we call now metaphysics or even ethics. So people like Descartes and George Berkeley, from the empiricist tradition, Locke, Hume, and even the maker of calculus, not just Newton, but also Spinoza and what was the other person who worked on calculus. All of these were on both frontiers of what is called natural philosophy and also frontier of moral political philosophy and metaphysics. Now, what is the question they are grappling with? The questions have to do with ontology, and ontology, very briefly, is about existence. What is existence? What is out there? And people now had obviously views about that, views of the form that there's a reality out there which is independent of us. And so you had all these examples. If a tree falls in the forest and there's no one around, does it still make a sound? Is a reality independent of us and independent of us as in all living beings, etc., or is it, as George Berkeley said, where it's all in the mind of God? So questions of ontology: what is out there? What is existence for us as well as for the world beyond us, if there is a distinction between us and the world? And the second question, which we call epistemology: what is knowledge? What constitutes knowledge? How do we know? How do we know that what we call knowledge makes sense or not? And then, of course, ethics, which is questions about what is right and wrong, what is good and bad. And the key moment in some ways comes when people started thinking about natural philosophy, which is science, and ethics together. Can they be combined? Should they be combined? Do they form a problem that exists with ontology and epistemology? Can knowledge be independent of issues of ethics? This interplay is very, very important, and that's where really the question of what should be research methods, what's the foundation of research, that question starts arising, because a lot of people start saying, well, it's not just an observer looking at the world and trying to see what is happening there and creating, therefore, science and theory. Is the observer involved? Is the observer neutral? What are the views of the observer? Do they make a difference to the kind of science that gets done? How do we connect what is out there to what we can know? And how do we know the connection works? A question that Immanuel Kant labored over a lot, and then said that it was David Hume who woke him from his dogmatic slumbers, right? Because he said Hume had very critically shown that induction doesn't work in terms of a theory and thinking. It's not a necessary connection, it's just observed connection. And so if that's the case, then all our theories about the world became very precarious. And so Immanuel Kant came with an answer that there is a connection between us and the world. And then obviously the big question would be then what is our role in it? And how do we play that role, right? So it's not just inert substance out there being watched and played by inert substance on this side. It is a lot more complex than that. And so if you look at early empiricism, people like Francis Bacon, for example, they talk about, and they're very clear about the empiricism that they're building is that we start with observations. Observations for them are theory-free. They are facts, right? They're out there. The stone falls towards the earth, or whatever is it's a fact. They are indubitable. You can't doubt them. We will see that plays a huge role in, for example, Descartes also. But in terms of observations, they are indubitable. The sun rises. They are theory-free, and they are value-free. Value in the sense that you are not associating a normative thing to something, you are just observing, right? It's not that I think it is good or bad, I think it is right or wrong. It is value-free observation. And then, of course, the empiricist said that from observation, we go to a tentative generalization, which is induction, right? So you observe the sun rising every day and you say, oh, it's going to rise tomorrow. And you have a general theory about that, etc. Then comes verification, which leads to either rejection or law. Of course, this becomes a lot more complicated, a lot more nuanced, but this is the basis for what the usual example that we give of induction. It's almost in every introductory philosophy text. You'll see Socrates is mortal, Socrates is a human, therefore all humans must be mortal, right? You're going from observation to generalization in the law, the induction argument. Keep in mind that, of course, Hume had shown that it doesn't matter how many times the sun has risen, just because it's been rising in the past doesn't mean it will, unless you posit a regularity in the world, which is the question that Kant was asking. So induction in that sense became very difficult, but right now, where we are at early empiricism, this is how they thought science would happen, that you have these observations and then you create a law, a theory, etc., that explains these observations in some ways. And there was tremendous success in the early days to science, as you remember with Newton, and for example. Newton has this lovely quote on saying that, well, if it doesn't come from observation, then it's not really science. Early empiricism, in a way, starts with observation, ends with observation. It gives observation that space and level of being theory-free, indubitable, value-free, and so on. Now, the other side of the early development in theories of research is what comes from Descartes, which is the rationalism. This is the other way, in some ways, that you begin with a hypothesis. And that hypothesis is, in Kantian terms, a priori, is not dependent on observation. It is independent of observation. Where does it come from is a good question. We'll come to that later. Then you test that hypothesis and you can accept or reject it, right? You begin with the hypothesis, all humans are mortal. And then, of course, Socrates, if Socrates is human, then Socrates must be productive. Understand.
Marcel, you've got frozen, so perhaps it's a good idea if you stop your video, and perhaps the net will be better. Yeah, I think he had to drop out and he'll start again. It's a very, I would say, sakil, tough topic. And he is taking us, step by step into all those processes. Ji, Faisal, you're back?
Ji, I am. My apologies, मैंने video बंद कर दी अपनी.
बहुत अच्छा किया. I think it's good to unvideo yourself and then start. There
Can you
we
see
go.
my screen now?
Absolutely. Put it in the slide mode. Yeah.
So I was talking about early rationalism and how that is a very different way of thinking about the world. And it's the interplay of this rationalism and empiricism that we will see develops later into some very interesting ways of thinking about research in the present day. But before we go there, let me just go to the full development in some ways of empiricism. This is Auguste Comte. Comte came up with what is called positivism in the true sense of the word. It is methodologically empiricist. So remember that early we start with observation, we generalize from observation. That's Comte saying this is the way science is done. And it is methodological monism. He says this is the only way science is done, right? This is the, that argument of you see an apple falling and you come up with a theory of gravitation model that we anecdotally talk about Newton and so on. So it's based on inductivism, it's induction. It looks for very systematic verifiability, whether you call it falsifiability, verifiability. Modern times, Popper and others have done work on this. But the idea is that you test it out. And if it holds up in testing, you continue to say, okay, this is something acceptable. Obviously, if you find a counter to it, then it gets rejected. The fact it is objective and totally independent of the observer. So it's very important to realize that the aim of positivism is very universal theory. It is the same theory, then will explain lots of things. It will be the same for science, social science. It doesn't matter what kind of science. If it is science, then this is the method. This is the only method. This is how you do it. And it is neutral, objective. Of course, in the telling of this story, I'm taking the pure form. You will have positivism, softer forms also. That's true for all theories. where you will have a bit of give and take. The fact-value dichotomy is very clear. What are facts are facts. What is value is value. Fact is that this is square. Value might be I like it, I dislike it, whatever, and so on and so forth, right? And of course, if you read Locke and others carefully, you'll see that fact-value distinction, even in the expositors of positivism and empiricism, is not as ironclad as they would like it to be. But of course, later we know this becomes a lot more difficult and problematic. And this fact-value dichotomy is going to give rise to many different kinds of theories of research later, and we'll come to those in just a moment. Observations, as I said, are pure and indubitable. Right, this is what gives power to the science. Right, there is no value that I'm bringing in. There's nothing corrupting the observation, and its purity. And it's a unilateral relationship, one-way relationship between observation and theory. You go from observation to theory. You go from observation to theory, not the other way around. You don't do theory to observation, right? So positivism in that sense, in its pure form, is very, very clear. And this was popular till, say, 1950s, etc. There's some forms of it that are still there. Some pure scientists or scientists of pure sciences, etc., still believe in some version of this. And there are obviously some truths here. Theories don't die. Theories in a dialectical become richer by having thesis, antithesis, and then synthesis. So we will see how that works in the foundations of research. And so it clearly has a very universal ambition. It is objective. It tends to be very quantitative. So that quant-qual debate comes here also. And it tries to get to causal relations. So what is the cause for something happening, right? So if the sun is rising every day, what's the cause? And the cause is obviously theory of gravity, etc., that we generalize to. But that's their positivism wants to, and this is coming from pure science, largely wants to go to a very causal relationship. But now is the time we'll complicate. So one of the first questions to think about, really a lot harder, is, but what if we do not have the kind of regularities that we see in natural science areas, in social science areas? And you can take examples from any laws that you like from economics and political science. The laws of physics are of a very different, in some ways, nature and scale compared to, say, the law of demand. The law of demand says that when price goes up, demand comes down, and vice versa. But we know that under many different conditions, that's not going to hold. Look at the iron law of oligarchy in political science, or any other law for political science for that matter. In social sciences, we deal with conscious beings. We deal with sentient beings. And so to have that kind of regularity, which we have in pure science, might not even be there or possible. And so to go back to say methodological monism and staying with observation, keeping it value neutral, and that's the only way, then becomes very complicated, because here we don't have, and imagine a world that didn't have regularities, right? Then how do you then generalize? How do you create laws and theories, etc.? So, and of course, nobody is saying that it's completely random. That's where ethics and a lot of other things come in. It's not completely random, but at the same time, it doesn't have the kind of law-like structure that pure sciences does. Is there one scientific method? That question has been raised many times, and that we will come back to this in a moment, because there isn't. Now, we live in a world of theory pluralism also, and there's a very good reason for that. A big question was about the objectivity of the person who's looking. But the problem a lot of social sciences raised, and many of the versions of theory later coming up, is subjectivity is about consciousness, personhood, agency, and a lot of things that we value. I mean, take a simple example, right? You have somebody raising a hand in a voting process. They are voting for XYZ option, and they raise their hands to vote for that. Now, if you were only doing causality relation, you would be asking the question, why have they raised their hand? But to understand their reasons for raising hand, you have to understand the subjectivity of that person also, their agency, their personhood. And that's not going to happen through only objective fact observation. It's going to happen by actually deeply understanding the context the person is in, their historical ways of saying, even understanding somebody raising a hand is going to require that this is how democracies vote, for example, when it is by raising hand. You have to have that context of democracy. You have to have an understanding of what it means. And the same symbol will not have the same meaning across cultures also, across history as well. Take a simple example of thumbs up, right? A thumbs up in America is somebody saying, great, go ahead, etc. But a thumbs up in other cultures is considered rude, and is considered not acceptable as a, right? So that subjectivity, cultural relativeness, historical context, and subjectivities of the person matter, and they matter a lot. And where interpretivism comes in, the world is meaningful and its meaning matters. So what meaning we give to the world as persons is very important. And that's been a tremendous critique of positivism, which has allowed us to go into interpretivist theories, and we will come to some of them in a moment. What do they mean? We are social, as in we are grounded in our social realities. Our understanding is historically and culturally conditioned. You can think of any number of examples that are better explained through understanding the history and culture of the people that it is coming through, whether it be practices in, say, India or Pakistan or Africa or North America or any of these places. We are essentially social beings that are very rooted in our history and culture, etc. And the question then that was raised by many theorists is, can we be objective? What does it mean to be objective when you are so historically, culturally conditioned? And in some cases, or in many cases, is it even desirable to be objective? So think about when you're studying, for example, child labor, or you're studying a problem like how many working hours should it be? Should it be 80 working hours and children also working, or should be restricted to 40 hours of a work week? Is it desirable in all circumstances to be objective? By objective meaning, okay, you don't have a position on what you're studying. Think of slavery, for example. Think of any of the practices, sati that used to happen, or honor killing that still sometimes happens. I mean, do we want to be objective when we are studying these? And is it possible to be objective when you're studying this? Won't your personality and person come into when you're studying such subjects? Popper, obviously, and the rationalist thought that all observations are theory-laden. This is something, it's a, I think, neo-Kantian point that Popper and others were making, that observation is not theory-free. This notion of observation as indubitable fact is a myth to a certain extent. And of course, you will find many examples in the work of Popper and rationalists to think about that. All sociological theories are limited to specific social groups. This is Mannheim and the relativism that he brought to theory, that you have to have historical, cultural context to understand sociological. Sociological theory can't be universal and monist. It can't be one universal theory. And if you want to look at a good example of trying to understand something in the context of the theory, the Balinese cockfight that was studied by one of the anthropologists, a very famous one. If you just Google Balinese cockfight, the paper is an amazing example of what is called thick description and how you do theory in that area. The question of value freedom, value neutrality, value relevance. As I said, when you're studying bonded labor, honor killings, out of school children, is value neutrality possible? Is it desirable? Should the researcher say, oh, I'm only studying how many children are out there, out of schools, but I don't have a position on it, etc., or on honor killings or on bonded labor or whatever. And both questions are important and should be thought carefully, because in research they matter. They matter because should we be indifferent to the moral implications of our research? Clearly not. And then if we are not, then are value neutrality possible and desirable? What comes out of it is all of these theories in some ways, which enrich, as I said, remember, theory in some ways doesn't die. By pushing its limits, you think of its limitations. And that's what a lot of theorists have done when they're thinking about positivism, the scientific method, trying to copy pure sciences methods in social sciences, and economics probably went the furthest in this attempt, trying to mathematize all of economics. So if you look at 1940s and 50s work of a lot of people, Samuelson and Arrow and others, and Debro, that was a huge attempt to mathematize most of economics, especially micro. And the limitations came out very quickly in the 60s and 70s when economics became a lot more, you went towards descriptivism, hermeneutics, which is essentially meaning and interpretation matters, right? You interpret, it's not just text being interpreted. So it's not just what, when a poet has said something, what has the poet said? What is your understanding of what the poet has said? So that will always be an interpretation. Some extreme people will say you will never know what the poet actually said because you will always be interpreting it from your point of view. Yes, you can have a better understanding of what the poet said or what the researchers said by looking at their context, their culture, their history, their interpretation, etc. But will it ever be a guarantee that you have gotten to what they actually wanted to say? No. These will all be interpretations, good, bad, closer, not so closer, etc., etc. Value neutrality, that question, can there be value neutrality, has raised very nice theories that have come out, theories of research that have. So it has given, for example, rise to critical theory, right? Critical theories talks about the structures of inequality that are built into our societies, etc., and looks at them directly and says, how can you be neutral when you are studying inequality or when you're studying how children will fare in their schools and go beyond, when you take a critical view to existing facts and say, well, these facts are embedded in current structures and so on. So that led to an entire flowering of what is known as critical theory. Feminist theory in some ways is a part of that, at least to my reading. Obviously, it is standing on its own, but it has its own ways of looking at the world. But it takes a very critical lens to that idea of not just methodological monism, but also one way of doing research and value neutrality, etc. Similarly, look at the question of disability theory, for example. A lot of people used to take the medical view of disability, right? Somebody has a limitation in terms of physical movement, or can't see or can't hear. But a lot of modern theorists have talked about, well, isn't that a social construction that you're putting on? Yes, underlying there is a difference, but the fact that you think stairs are normal rather than ramps is what is leading to a problem of interpreting disability. It is the structures that you're creating, right? Why are stairs more natural or normal than ramps? And stairs are, of course, a construction. It's a social construction. So if you say that there are stairs everywhere, then clearly somebody who can't walk will not be able to climb those stairs. But if we had a very different notion of mobility, and if most people had wheels on their limbs rather than feet, we would have a very different notion of what is normal and natural and so on. So in some way, disability is a social construction. Yes, of course, there's an underlying fact of difference, but what we then make out of it in our social structures, in our society, is a social creation. And similarly, finally, postmodernism is very much in the same sort of critical frame that a lot of people have, and is very historical, contextual. Some of the postmodern theorists have very explicitly done that in the latter part of the 20th century, middle 20th century and onwards. So we're almost 40 minutes into it. I do want to come to some discussion questions, etc. So let me say where we are. I think this is a fascinating area. It's, as I said, it's 300, 400 years of thinking of very intelligent people who spent a lot of time thinking about research and questions and so on. So if people are interested, they should definitely delve deeper into some of the work and authors, but it will take time. Some of these authors are not easy to read, but more than easy, they obviously they represent their time and how thinking was done at their time, and so it takes a bit of time to get into them. So let me just say, social science will not have the same type of, I think it is clear for most people, most researchers, that social science will not have the same type of theory as physical science. And dreams of one method and one theory that explains whether it be causality or whatever, they are over. I think we are in the world of pluralism in terms of theoretical frameworks and theories for research. Social science does not have laws like physical sciences. So dream of human physics, which was very popular at one time, that you can predict suicide, you can predict something like X, Y, Z that a person can do, will do, etc. I think those days are over as well. Humans are much more complex, and that is realized in some of the theories that we have just mentioned and talked about. There cannot be a methodological monism, which means that for any researcher thinking about doing any research, you have to think deeply about your method. You have to think about what is the method that you want to utilize for your question. And I'll come to what determines in some ways the method, at least my understanding. Subjectivity is important. Human subjectivity is very important in research as well as in understanding the world, in understanding what is happening and creating how we understand the world as well. And you cannot do away with subjectivity in both methods as well as in research. Interpretation is ubiquitous. It's everywhere. Interpretation is what we do when we are trying to think about facts which are again, in some ways, not value-free. They are not indubitable. They are created in a certain context, and then, of course, we interpret from that. Value neutrality, even if possible, might not be desirable. So again, remember, we started by asking what happens when we bring together ethics and epistemology and ontology. So value neutrality then has to be thought through carefully. Should I be value neutral? Can I be value neutral? Maybe all research doesn't require. Yes, we should reveal our preferences or our subjectivity or our biases if we can, or the positionality that we have as a researcher. And that is for transparency as well as for other things, it's required, but it might not be possible or desirable to be value-free or value-neutral. So the final thing, the question that you have in terms of your research, that will determine the method that you use. May I say it twice because I thought it was worth repeating. The question determines the method. But self-awareness about your method is very important, because that's where the cycle of justification, knowledge, that's where epistemology comes in, and is very important. You need to make your epistemology very clear. Okay, what is the kind of knowledge that you're creating and how, and that requires self-awareness and self-reflection. Let me stop here, and then hopefully we can have some discussion and look at the questions.
You know, Professor, I have heard this theories of research from the different experts who have been a part of our program. And you have broken it down so simply into bite-sized concepts, and you have linked them together so it's easy for you carry the reader along. Thank you so much. We have some questions, and I'm requesting Mehwish Raza. You see her on the screen. She is the deputy head at CLT, and she will place the questions that you have had in the chat. As I know that Zoom, we have surpassed 1,000, and another 1,000, I think, are right now at live stream, and they have also placed their questions over there. So we've tried to put the questions together, right, Mehwish? Yeah. And we have tried to lump them together, the common questions, so we don't waste time. G, over to you, Mehwish.
Thank you so much, and thank you for such an informative talk, Dr. Bari. So our first question is from Amber Shahzadi from Common Christian College University. She's asking, positivism dominates quantitative social research, but can it truly capture human experiences like poverty or discrimination, or should interpretism always guide social inquiry?
Yeah, but so this is a very interesting question. Can you enrich positivism? Of course, I mean, most researchers would now be mixed method researchers. Most researchers would think very carefully about the methodology. Let me give you a very, very simple example. There's a colleague of mine, Tahir Andrabi, who also works on education. He teaches in US. Tahir has a very nice paper that explains recovery of education outcomes in children after the earthquake. If you remember, we had a 2005 earthquake. After that, they went a few years later there, did the survey again to figure out which household had, and the children in which household had better recovery in terms of educational outcomes, height, weight, and things like that. And they found, interestingly, they had obviously had a very nice control variable, which was distance from the fault line, because that was unknown to people. So it's a very strong, good independent variable that they had. So a good paper in that sense from a quant perspective. And they found that children recovery was better, not just in education, but in health, in terms of height and weight of children, for mothers who had been to school, who had some education. right? And I mean, we know in education literature, we know that if mothers are educated, they have a tremendous impact on educational and health and other outcomes of children. Here also, they found that even in recovery, even children who were in utero at the time of the earthquake had better outcomes if the mother was educated. And I was asking Tahir the question, tell me, why did this happen? Right? What does education do that allows this effect to come through? So effect is very clear. It's causally very strongly identified. But the question then was, what are the pathways through which this works? And you can think of multiple pathways, even a priori, right? It might be that the mother's education gives access to information. It might be that the mother's education changes the social circle in which the mother works or moves. It might be that mother has more income because she's working outside. It might be something else going on. She is more organized. Well, there's a whole bunch of hypotheses that you can generate, but how do you find that? So for somebody who's doing more detailed research, they obviously stopped with the quant work in that paper. But when I asked him the question, he said it would be lovely to go back and go do much more detailed, more subjective, more qualitative work to understand the pathways through which such an effect comes through, right? So causality can be established by quant, but if you really want to make a deeper understanding of some of these things, you would require much more interpretive, deeper work, qualitative work, interviewing people, trying to see how their world changes, what is the differences in the worlds of these mothers, and then figure out what might be the pathways through which, say, education works.
Thank you so much. Building on your response to this, we have another similar question from Dr. Dean, St. Edmund's College in UK. He's asking, does subjectivity in research mean the lived reality of the researcher or the personal experiences of the respondents? So there's an overlap there.
Both. Yeah. And you have to be very aware of both. So when you are trying to understand the world that your subjects live in, their subjectivity will matter a lot. And you have to be very aware of that, conscious of that, which is why sometimes anthropologists spend a lot of time, or sociologists, in a culture before they start writing about that culture or the practices of that culture. And you have to be very aware of your own positionality and where you are coming from and your subjectivity, because you bring a lot of things with you, your own culture, your history, your education, your family, everything. And if you're not reflexive and conscious about that, there might be things that go into your research and understanding which are dependent not on what is out there, but are dependent on what is in you. And so it requires both awareness of both kinds of subjectivities.
I think to summarize this, contextual analysis is really important for any research. And when we are analyzing the context, it requires a deep understanding of our own perspectives as well as the people whom we will be interacting during the process of research. So our next question is from Rabia Shahzadi, and she's asking if you could please elaborate on the concept of value neutrality in research. And this question is from Rabia Shahzadi from Punjab University.
I mean, think of any difficult question that we look at sometimes. Think of bonded labor. I mean, are we, as a researcher, do we just study it, or do we have a position on bonded labor as well? Can we be neutral about something like bonded labor? We say, oh, I don't care. I'm only studying what is bonded labor. I think that's a very hard position to take. I know for myself, I would never be able to say I'm completely neutral to the plight of what the children are going through, what their existence is like, what is happening to them under bondage, etc. Right, and that my value system, etc., will come in whether I acknowledge it or not, and it is better to acknowledge it. it is better to take that on head on and say, look, I am not neutral in this case. I do have a strong or weak, whatever position in such a case that this should not be happening. And my research is showing the kind of lives it leads, etc. And of course, keep in mind my value position also, because that might have impacted in how I have interpreted certain things. And that's important to show up upfront. If you hide that, then the problem becomes that you're creating another bias for the reader to then sift through. And your reflection on this would be nicer, because then it puts it up front. Here are the limitations, or here are the strengths of this study. It can be a limitation or strength depending on which tradition people are coming from and how they are reading this.
So building on this, we have a relevant question from Maliha Ali, Sindh Institute of Medical Sciences. She's asking, when formulating a tentative hypothesis based on prior research or personal experience, how can we ensure that it remains unbiased?
I don't think you can ever be 100% certain about whether you have a totally unbiased hypothesis, etc. But what is important is that you be aware of that there is a possibility of biases that is there, and you be reflective about that. I think is all that can be asked of researchers. I don't think the demand can be to have no bias at all. That might be impossible. Some of the researchers make this point very clearly, that you cannot be completely unbiased. I mean, obviously, Mannheim and others go much stronger than that. And they say, okay, it's not possible. You're not an empty vessel that is coming to look at the world anew. It's that tabula rasa of John Locke, etc. It doesn't exist when we are doing research, because by the time we are doing research, we've spent whatever 20, 30 years of our lives being in certain contexts, in certain cultures, in certain history, reading a lot, learning a lot, living our experiences. How can we not have those already as part of who we are? That's what I am in some ways, right? I am, I'm sorry for this, but Urdu mein दुनिया ने जो भी हवादिस की शक्ल में मुझे दिया, very nice shape, वही लौटा रहा हूं मैं, right? I am giving back. The poet had said in his poetry that I'm giving back what the world has given me in the terms of whatever I've seen, whatever I've witnessed, whatever I've gone through, right? So this is a conversation that you're having with the world and with peers, etc. So that conversation cannot be totally context-free, but it can be made as much as possible transparent to people that this is where I'm coming from. These are the biases that I might have, or these are the ones that I've already tried to address in my research, and this is the result of that. And of course, then when that goes to the peers, that conversation can continue, and then people can come up with their interpretations of any researcher's work.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I think our individual perspectives is something that makes us unique. If everybody comes in without a perspective and without your own thoughts, then the research would become very mechanical and very, similar in nature. So we have the next question from Sami Ishaq from Sindh Madrasatul Islam University. And it's a very simple yet complex question. In your opinion, is there a best epistemological approach for social sciences research, or does it always depend on the context?
It depends on the question and the context. I don't think there is a best or worst or in any ways. I think there are questions that you will find are very amenable to and closer to what Positivism was saying. There are questions that go the other way. And then there's most questions that we have which will require taking elements from all of these, whether it is qual, objective, subjective, whatever sort of notion you're looking at in terms of its extreme versions and purity, you will have to mix them up in most research. That pure sciences might still have some versions of positivism, though they've been questioned even there. If you look at the work of Kuhn and Lakatos, for example, he's very strong on this. But and Feyerabend to even beyond Lakatos, Feyerabend. But I don't think, but still they do have certain spaces in which positivism or can work reasonably well. But I think what is more important than thinking about is there a best way is to think about what is the best way to tackle your question. And I think spending some time or as much time as possible thinking about the question and how do you want to tackle it will serve you well for doing research. Too much research, this is my very humble opinion, I think too much research happens by diving directly into let's do a survey, let's do this, X did this, let's just replicate that, etc. That doesn't have the kind of reflectiveness that is needed for doing original work. Original work requires us to think through our question and methods in a much more sort of conscious way.
Or also read the current literature with your own perspective to draw out the gaps in your opinion in present literature. So talking about technology, we have a question from Amir Shahzad from Sichuan University, China. And he's asking, given the rise of digital information, how does applied epistemology help assess the reliability of knowledge claims on the internet and social media?
So I can answer some part of it. I don't know much about the other part, knowledge claims on the internet. I think there are many experts who work on that, and they would probably be much better suited for this. The part that I can answer is the part that says that you have access to a lot more information, you have now AI coming in, etc. To me, all of these are tools that should enrich our consciousness and our ability to do research, but there are no automatics and there are no shortcuts to research. Whether it's AI or anything else, it has to be your mind engaging with the question and methods and coming up with what you are able to say is the best way for you and defend it. But the bigger part of that question had to do with the internet, information on it, its veracity, etc. That I too am a student of that. There will be, I'm sure, during the course there will be others who can answer that question much better.
Another question of the same type was asked by Nadia Ali, and I'm sure Nadia, this Dr. Bari's answer must have clarified your question, that how the digital media platforms are influencing the current theories in research. We have another question from Kutsia Munir, and she's asking, what is the most effective approach to conducting mixed method research? I think this is
depends on your question.
Yeah.
And it totally depends on your question.
Yeah.
The question that you're trying to investigate will tell you what are the best ways of using mixed method. Usually quant relies a lot more on surveys, but I think it's a misnomer to restrict quant to surveys. You can do quant through interviews also. You can do quant through even focus groups, etc. But qual through surveys is much harder. I think for qual, it's very clear you have to go much deeper, get to know the subject a lot more, investigate their context, culture, their background, their setting, etc. So that requires a lot more interactive exposure to the subject. And so I think now the variety of tools that you have available, and there are many books that talk about these, is a lot more, and they have been enriched by this development of all the interpretive theories and hermeneutics and so on. So we have a much richer canvas available for doing research on any question.
Yeah, so this answers the question asked by Sajid Hussain earlier. You asked that which book or article should you read to dwell further into these topics? So I think this answers that. We have another question from Emilia John, and she's asking if you could please provide a simple example to help understand the concepts of ontology and epistemology.
So epistemology is what is knowledge. And we usually, the older definition for that was a justified true belief. When you say, I know there's a door in front of me where I'm sitting. Now, it is true. I believe it to be the case also. And I have a justification for saying that as well. And that justification is the world of causality and everything that goes with it. I can see the door in the past, the sight has been very clear, etc., and so on. So there is when you say what is knowledge, one definition which has been questioned and enriched later was knowledge is justified true belief in its, let's say this was an older pristine one. And then, but the question is, okay, what is justification? What kinds of justification will work? So give you a simple example. This has been quoted in many philosophy texts. There's a soldier who goes missing in the war, and the army, deciding on the evidence available to them, think that he's died. So they come back to the home country and they tell the mother that the soldier is dead. But actually, the mother says, no, he's alive. I can feel him, he's alive. Now that's a mother's feeling, right? Now the question is, does that constitute knowledge? And we are constrained to say, well, no, it doesn't constitute knowledge, because what's the justificatory mechanism? Even if that soldier is alive, what's the justificatory mechanism that makes it knowledge for the mother? And so if we don't have the right justification, of course, eventually we might find that she had some way of knowing that might provide a justification. But till we have that justification, it's not knowledge, it's a hunch. So that's the entire area of what is knowledge is epistemology. This is obviously a very important question for foundations of reason. Ontology is what is out there. I mean, you have many different versions of it, right? Is it only my mind? Are all of you a figment of my dreams? Is there something existing beyond my mind? Are there other minds there? Are there bodies? When we say there is a body, what do we mean? Is it independent of mind? And there, obviously, the more accepted version is that, yes, there is a physical universe which is independent of most humans and sentients. But George Barclay, for example, had questioned that. He had said, well, no, everything, this entire world as it is just an idea in the mind of God. And it exists because it continues to exist in the mind of God. Now, those are obviously, Kant had made a distinction between phenomena and noumena. Phenomena being what we observe, what we see, the world around us, and noumena, what is behind it. So for Kant, noumena was inaccessible. We can't know about noumena because we don't have any access to it. And in some ways, in his more sort of fanciful philosophy, he put a lot of religion and other things beyond phenomena, right? Those were the hopes and dreams that we have, and so on and so forth. For Hume, physical world was the only world. And for Barclay, it was just an idea, not a world. So the difference between idealists, realists, etc. So all that discussion, all that reality is what is ontology. And it's very important because if you think of the world out there that has no impact of the observer and vice versa, doesn't impact the observer, then positivism, monism made more sense for those people. But if you think that the world is constructed by my concepts and my concepts play a part in the construction of the world, by my, I mean human concepts, human understanding, human culture, human language, human subjectivity, then of course you automatically move to some of the other theories that we have just talked about. I don't know if that explains.
It does. It was quite a detailed description. So we have the next question from Mariam Khalid, Common Christian College University. How do you foresee the role of social scientists from the regions like Latin America and Asia in the drive towards contextualizing positivism to make it more relevant?
I think there's been a tremendous flowering of theory and social science research across the world in most regions. I think the movements to, for example, decolonize, to do contextually relevant work, to do hermeneutics, to do interpretivist work. Some of these words are very hard to keep pronouncing. But all of those have created a real flowering of theory and of relevant research that now comes in. So I think in a way it has become a lot more difficult. So if you're developing now a course on poverty, the amount of literature available and the richness of it is amazing. Whereas at some point it might have been much less and much narrower. Now the perspectives vary so much. And there has been such original contribution. Even say the field that I know a bit about, to think about education and look at some of the contributions that have come from Latin America on education and critical theory and so on. Think of the contributions that have come from Africa and some from South Asia or East Asia. They have just enriched the entire palette so much. But it also makes it difficult to be aware and abreast of all of this work also. So I think it's getting harder for scholars to go across regions and be at the forefront of research in a number of these areas. Then.
Thank you so much. The next question is from Abdul Hamid Khumbar, and he's asking,
sorry, maybe I lost your voice. Maybe my
yeah.
Yeah,
she
how
is.
do we break the vicious cycle of now? Okay, so my internet connection is not stable. I'm gonna turn off the video. I hope I'm audible now.
Yeah.
Ji, bilkul, ji.
All right. So our next question is from Abdul Hamid Kumbal, and he's asking, how do we break the vicious cycle of monism in the theories of knowledge?
By creating more research, by doing the work. And that's how, let many flowers bloom. So produce the research that questions some of the monist versions, and we'll have a much more interesting palette.
All right, thank you so much. So we have many questions from different participants here, but the focus of those questions are how to manage subjectivity. So could you just generally elaborate on the notion of subjectivity and how to address that in research?
I mean, if it's the subjectivity of the researcher, I think your methods and the richness of the method can, to a certain extent, make it very clear to the reader to what extent your subjectivity still matters. As I said, read some of the masters of research. They give excellent examples of how to manage individual context, subjectivity, individual positionality. If it is the subjectivity of the subject that you're worried about, that is part of your research. So don't worry too much about that. You have the methods to fully go deeper into each person's subjectivity on the qualitative side, on the all of these theories, interpretivist theories that we have talked about. I think the very more is about the subjectivity of the researcher himself or herself. And that part, I think, is self-awareness, self-consciousness, and making it very clear what your assumptions are, what your methods are, how you have then done the analysis for the data, and how you have come up with the interpretations that you. If you make that clear, your subjectivity will then be clearly observable to others to the extent that is possible, and that's how you will be able to control that. There is no set rule or method for that. Obviously, there can't be.
Yeah, thank you so much for this answer. There are many other questions where participants are asking about how to find relevant literature. And the reason I have not posted this question here during the question and answer session is because the next webinar, which is happening in 45 minutes, answers this question, and it will help you retrieve related literature, understanding literature. So join us in the next webinar, which is about AI and research. And with this, I would like to thank you, Dr. Bari, for such comprehensive responses. And now I would request Dr. Rukhsana to please close the session.
Yeah. But before I close this session, Faisal, there's one last question from a colleague, Mariam. And I thought that was something that would really interest you. How do you foresee the role of social scientists from regions like Latin America and Asia in the drive towards contextualizing positivism to make it more relevant? We're talking about creating our own knowledge. And I think that should be the last question, if not the least. Yes.
Dr. Rukhsana, he already answered that question. We asked that from Mariam Khaled.
Okay, you did.
Dr. Sana, I mean, I think that development is definitely happening, and we see a lot of it in Latin America as well as India, and to a certain extent now in Pakistan also. I mean, in recent times, Pakistani scholars have done some amazing work in history, for example, in sociology now increasingly, and I think it's getting deeper and much better. And in some other areas as well, which I obviously don't know. I think there are some areas that are still missing, and we don't have the depth. My own feeling is that economics is still too narrow. I know my economist friends are going to kill me for saying this, but it is still too narrow in Pakistan. It is still too looking to the West too much. But hopefully that over time we'll have more depth as we have more and more people, more researchers and universities trying to do high quality research here.
I totally agree. I'm sorry I missed that, Mavish, because I thought that was really a powerful question and we need to dwell on that. Thank you so much, Faisal. It was a delightfully easy. You made it bite-sized and comfortable for us to swallow, because it is a tough discipline. It's like you need to know about theories, and that's a tough call. But we are trying now, and I think we should try to make our own theories for our own context, and that's the next step. There are lots of other sessions to come, and lots of your answers that you have posted will be taken care of them. For now, we bid you goodbye, and thank you so much for staying with us, nearly 2,000 of you. We are very, very thankful for your support and for your attention. Thank you. And now for the next session, to Mavish, we are getting ready for your session, okay? Okay, thank you. Thank you.